Welcome to everybody who's just joining us right now. I think we can get started. We got a good group joining us today. So thanks once again for taking some time out of your lunch break to join us and having this conversation about making forage with cover crops, how cover crops fit into our systems when we've got livestock or connected to those who've got livestock. My name is Cameron Ogilvie. I'm the Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator for the Soils at Guelph initiative, a University of Guelph initiative to better connect soil scientists with folks in the industry. And on behalf of Soils at Guelph, we're a proud partner in helping to host this webinar series with the Grain Farmers of Ontario, Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association, and the OMAFRA Soils team. So we all welcome you and are really glad that you've chosen to join us today. We're also really glad to our partner Quality Seeds, who is sponsoring this conversation, this webinar today. So thank you to Quality Seeds for your support. We wouldn't be able to put this on in this way without you. So big shout out to them. We would like to get to know a little bit about who you are, who are joining us today. So we're going to launch a poll in just a few moments. And we'd really love to get to know, who are you connected to? Who are you representing as you join us in this conversation today? So feel free to fill that out. And once we've got a few responses there, we can move on. I see we're getting some good responses already. So thank you to everyone. All right, the conversation that we are having today on making forage, we are joined by Tyler Lester, Reinhoud Verhoef, and Christine O'Reilly. So we're going to go through a little bit of a presentation from the three of them as they talk about what they're doing, what their expertise and their specialties are. And then we will get into a little bit of a discussion at the end, which I will host. And we'll be looking for questions from you, the audience. So feel free to use that chat to drop your questions in, and we will get to those as soon as we're able to. And really looking forward to having an engaging and interactive conversation today. So without any further ado, Tyler, I'm going to hand the mic off to you to begin. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your operation?
Good day, everybody. My name is Tyler Lester, and my family and I farm approximately 600 acres of cash crop in Prince Edward County. We started planting cover crops on our farm on a large scale about 5 years ago, and really like what we see as it increases our water retention and weed suppression. Last year we had approximately 180 acres in cover crops, and as far as I know, half of it was harvested as baleage. A neighbor of ours was short of feed and asked if he could buy that crop from us. And I'm always one to help someone in need. So he took that crop off as baleage. He and I have since come to an agreement where he will take some of my planted cover crop as baleage or forage feed, and in return I will get a significant majority of his manure. We've pretty much worked out a gentleman's agreement on the value of the feed versus the value of the manure, and worked it out close to a wash. There are some minor details that we haven't worked out yet, as to who will pay for the seed and who will pay for any tillage or the planting costs or the manure spreading costs. But it's a work in progress right now. We've estimated the value of the feed at 4 cents a pound standing, and I don't know the details of his manure application equipment, but he suggested the value of the manure at between $30 and $50 a load. It's not exactly terribly scientific that we figured that out to. I don't know the volume of the manure spreader or how far he's got to travel or any particular details, but that's about what I've been able to figure out so far. Cam, if you can scroll back to the beginning of the slideshow, that shows some of the tillage and planting equipment that we used. There we go. That's a Valmar 6056 granular applicator and a 16-foot Salford I-1200. I really like the way that broadcasts seed and gets a light tillage and a little bit of packing ahead of or behind the broadcast seed. That has worked really well for us. It has an infield travel speed of between 8 and 12 miles an hour, and you can really cover some acres and get a satisfactory catch of a cover crop using that. I've also used a 15-foot John Deere 1590 no-till drill and a Sunflower 15-foot no-till drill as well, and had equal success with those, although your acres an hour are a little bit less, as your travel speed is about 5 or 6 miles an hour. If you can scroll on through the slideshow, Cam, these are just some pictures of different catches that we've had. That crop there was oats and peas planted into volunteer winter wheat after the wheat was harvested and the straw was removed as bedding. That would be approximately 2 months growth right there. As far as different forage crops that we have used, cereal rye and oats and peas would be the biggest ones, or the largest volume of acres that we've planted. I would like to try some brassicas in that, some turnip, or some forage kale, but we're having a bit of difficulty finding someone who knows much about those forage crops as far as feed quality and how they would work in a dairy ration system. So for right now, we're working with oats and peas or cereal rye because they're a known quantity. I don't know if there's much else that I can add to that, guys, but that's about what I know.
Hey, thanks so much, Tyler. I think that's a great introduction, and I saw a few smiles as you were talking about brassicas, so maybe that will be a topic that we can come back to in further conversation today. So
Very
thanks
good.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tyler. We'll come back to you. I'm going to hand things off to Reinhoud.
Hello, everybody. My name is Reinhoud Verhoef, owner and operator of Verhoef Dairy Farm, with my wife and 2 kids. We started milking in 1999 here in Canada. Moved from Holland on 50 cow tie-stall barn, 50 kilos at the time, and we grew our operation with 100 acres at the time, and we grow our operation at the moment close to 300 kilos in a new freestall setup and 450 acres of land. We are focused mainly on the dairy. We don't do any field work, So that's all custom done from the start off. We got a really good relationship with the custom worker and the local Belmont Farm Supply for spraying and the fertilizer. So we are located in Elgin County, Belmont, so just south east of London. And yeah, so we are milking 200 cows 3 times a day, really pushing for high production and longevity in the herd. And our main crops are corn silage and alfalfa. And over the last 5 years, we're starting introduce some cover crops in that rotation as well. We do a little bit of soybeans and wheat on the as we work together with a close neighbor, cash cropper, who crops some acres of us that are 5 miles down the road, and we crop then his acres. So we just swapped it out that are closer to the dairy, so we can drag hose all the manure to those fields that are close by. So 90% of the manure gets all drag hosed. And so we can keep that all close to, and the feed supply close to the dairy. So if we take the corn silage off in September, usually this is a picture of 2018. That was a later year, that was October. So in the background we see dumper going, there's still chopping corn silage, and this tractor with the Lemken seed drill is planting cereal rye right into it. It's a one pass, so it has an kind of a disc rumen, Lemke rumen at the front of right behind the tractor, and then there is the seed drill following that. So that works really well. One pass. The headlands he takes a couple spins to just work it up, but then he goes back and forward as one pass, and it has a really good catch. The following picture would be, I think, last year's, that would be drier. So that was September 22nd that we planted also right away the same day as pretty much as to take the corn silage off. So we planted our cereal rye again. And at 100 pounds seed rate per acre. And we got a really good catch. So this is a picture of April this spring from that planting. And so in the fall we just drag hosed some manure. That was back in November, I think. We drag hosed 5,000 gallons manure on there, and then no fertilizer in the fall, but in the spring we do fertilizer, 350 pounds an acre of NK 21. And then we did also that same day. It was a little bit on the frost. This spring was a nice morning, and we could do that same morning also some drag hose manure again, liquid, of 3,000 gallon an acre. So we had a really good catch there. It was a phenomenal winter for it. I think as soon as you plant it, if you plant in September, you got a way better catch already as you go in October. And then in May, what was it, May 24th, I believe. No, it was earlier than that. We took the harvesting off. I got here May 11th we mowed it. Yeah, that is this picture. And then May 12th we did some tedding so we left it a day. The next day we tedded it, and then May 13th we did the harvesting. So that would be the next picture. So they come in self-propelled big claws and a couple dumpers. It was all around the dairy, so close by. It was an 80 acre field. So they chopped it in less than a day. And then it goes direct in a bunker silo. That would be the next picture. And then we got a big payloader there that packs it. Try to get it. This stuff is always hard to get it dry, so it was only a 30% dry matter. But it looks like it packs really well and it feeds out really well. Alfalfa we always try to get a little bit drier, but this year with the tedding, I think it helped a little, but it seems to look like that it stays around 28 to 30% dry matter. And so that bunk was right full, and actually another bunk a little bit in there too. It didn't even fit all in this bunk. Yeah. So there was lots of feed. And then actually the May 15th, we planted corn silage in that same field again. Yeah, that would be the next picture, I think. So we did on the right side of the picture, we worked it up with the lambkin twice, I believe. And then on the left side of the picture, we did kind of a trial to, especially this spring was so dry, to go no-till in the stubble. And it seems so far as a review, and we did some measurement of the corn lately, it's you don't see any difference. But the big difference is on the right side is about $45 an acre for the 2 passes. And on the left side, it's you don't have that, so it saves quite a bit of money that way per acre. What we also this year did, because it was so dry and conditions were good, we actually dragged hosed after planting, and we put 7,000 gallon an acre of liquid manure on there too. So that really helped to get a little bit of moisture on there, and it worked out really well actually. Yeah. So the next slide would be so that is one of the bunks we fill partly. Yeah, we feed with the self-propelled silo king and keep a nice face on the bunk, and we can do precision feeding that way. So we took half the alfalfa out of the ration and replaced it with the rye. And the butterfat actually really went up, yeah, through the summer now. So far I'm at 420 butterfat, and I've never seen that in the summer with these heat conditions as of today and yesterday. And that's all since we start feeding the rye. So it really and a high production still. The intakes are incredible. The manure is really good. If it comes out of the cow, the digestibility is just really good. So I for sure gonna grow more and less acres of alfalfa, and that actually can make some room for some other rotations in the plan. Yeah. So this is one of the samples of the rye, and it has 16.5% protein. So that is not no, there's even lower protein. Just 12, I think, yeah. So, but anyway, this because it is such a high digestible product, the cows eat a lot of it. I still could manage it to keep the production up and take actually less grain. So we run 80% forage diet on the milking cows right now. So that is quite a bit of cost savings as well.
Can I jump in a bit on this feed analysis?
Yes.
Because this is really cool, and I know some of our audience are probably familiar a little bit with feeding ruminants, and some of you are not. So we're gonna walk through this a little bit more in depth. So crude protein gets thrown around a lot. Basically, it's just a measure of all of the nitrogen in the feed. So it's a sort of thing that we're very familiar with. It is one measure of quality, but when you really start talking to particularly dairy nutritionists, they're really starting to move away from putting all of the emphasis on crude protein. So it is important, but it's not everything. And the 16% crude protein, 16.5% crude protein, I would expect to see that in a cereal that's harvested for dairy forage, right? So that tells me that probably Reinhoud's harvest timing is pretty good, because 16% crude protein in a grass in a vegetative state is very normal, particularly if it's getting enough nitrogen. So a little lower down, the last line in fibers says lignin. So lignin is indigestible fiber. This is the type of fiber that ruminants cannot digest. And the fact that it's only 2.8%, that's great. That means there's hardly any fiber in this crop that ruminants can't digest. So the rest of it may not be easy to digest, but they can use it. And that's a good thing, because that's where a lot of the energy comes from in a forage crop. So while grasses and cereals tend to have higher fiber content than legumes, a greater proportion of that fiber is digestible. So all of this is very good from a feeding perspective. And this is probably part of why Reinhoud is seeing, milk production's not tanking in the heat, which usually we see reductions in milk production in the heat. His butterfat content looks great. It's because there's lots of energy in this feed. The cows can use it very, very well. The one thing that I did want to kind of flag, very bottom line on this screen, that ash content, 9.28% ash. Reinhoud, Cam, Tyler, any of you know what ash is?
Yeah, that is contamination of the product, either through raking or maybe the tedding this year.
Correctly. Yeah. So ash in the lab, it's literally they take the forage sample, they stick it in an oven, and they burn it off, and whatever's left is called ash, because it literally is. But it's the total minerals in that forage sample. So some of it is the minerals that are naturally in the plant tissues, and some of it is exactly what Reinhoud just said. It's contamination. So in a grass, and I'm talking perennial grasses because I don't have numbers for cereal rye, but in a perennial grass, we'd expect the internal good mineral content to be kind of 4 to 6%. In alfalfa, it's usually 6 to 8. So when we see, especially an alfalfa-based forage that's over 9%, then I start to go, there's contamination somewhere. So was the rake a little too aggressive? Was the tedder a little too aggressive? Did they scalp the field someplace where there was a bump with the mower? Were the tires muddy on the packing tractor in that bunk? Those are all ways that we might get that in there. So I love that you're very happy with how this forage is feeding out. So I'm not horribly, terribly concerned about that ash level, but I think it's interesting to note that like that might be just slightly on the high side. So something possibly to talk to the contractor about.
Yeah, that was basically my part of it, I guess. Yeah, I don't think there are any more pictures. So yeah, thanks for listening. If any questions, let me know.
For sure. And as I think our audience will gather, there's definitely some enthusiasm from these panelists on talking about forage quality. So thanks, Christine, for jumping in there. Thanks, Reinhoud. I'm going to turn things back to Christine once again, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of the forage work that she does.
Thanks, Cam. So I want to zoom out a little bit and kind of put this into context, because both Tyler and Reinhoud are using annual forages in their systems in different ways. But before I forget, today we're focusing on stored forage, as you've probably gathered from the two farmers that we have talking today. And that's partly because there is a whole series on grazing cover crops coming up this fall. Myself and some of our livestock colleagues, as well as Beef Farmers of Ontario and Ontario Sheep Farmers, are hosting some webinars. They're coming up in November. Once we have dates and some speakers confirmed, we will let you know, but stay tuned for that if you're interested in learning more about grazing, because today is all about stored forage. All right, so once upon a time in Ontario, we always called annual forage crops emergency forage. And I'm here to tell you that I don't want to hear you calling them that anymore. And a big reason for that is economics. So this graph is showing our hay supply in the province from the late 80s up into a couple of years ago. That's the green line. So this is essentially our best estimate of supply, acres times average yield. The blue and orange lines are the number of head of cattle is blue, the number of head of sheep is orange. This is basically my proxy of supply and demand. So economics 101 says if you have more supply of something than there is demand, the price goes down. And if you have less supply of something than there is demand, the price goes up. So what this graph kind of shows us is that green line, I mean, back late 80s, early 90s, we had a lot of hay in this province. Like we're bouncing between 7 and 8 million tons a year production. And then it wobbles a lot in the couple decades in the middle. And then by about 2011, 2012, we're bouncing around the 4 million ton mark. So we're down almost half. If you look at the number of head, this is my proxy for demand. And keep in mind that this is not a complete picture of demand. I don't have any horse numbers in here, but horses are a major domestic market for hay. It also doesn't take into account the fact that, for example, cattle are bigger now than they were in the past. So even though we have fewer cattle now, they're larger, so they eat more. So there's a lot of nuance that's missing, especially on the demand side of this graph. But the point I want you to take from this is we're down to almost half of our production from 30 or 40 years ago. And our animal numbers, while they're down, they're not down nearly that much. So what this tells me as the provincial specialist is we used to have a lot of surplus. Hay used to be cheap. And now we're probably somewhere around equilibrium. Our hay production probably very closely matches our demand. And if you ask anyone who's had to buy hay in the last 5 years, they will tell you hay is not cheap anymore. So anyone on this call that's maybe been out of step with that market for a while because you don't have livestock, totally normal. But I'm here to tell you that perennial hay is a high value crop. So Kim, if you can take me to my next slide, please. And this matters. Perennial hay being a high value crop matters when we're talking about annual forage production, because it means that the role of annuals in our forage production systems has changed. So it used to be like, oh no, we have bad weather, whack in some annuals to just boost forage inventory and it'll get us through, but they're really expensive. And they are expensive because you have to plant every year, but the price gap isn't necessarily so big anymore to price annuals out of the market. So it can sometimes be cheaper than purchasing forage, or it can be that peace of mind. You know you've got those acres in the ground at home or at your neighbor's place, and you're not, trying to source hay from a different part of the province or from the prairies or from somewhere else. So really what this means is that annual forage crops are an important forage inventory management tool that we can take better advantage of than we have in the past, because that price, that value and cost of production scenario has changed significantly in the last 30 years. So I know this slide is titled "When is Pasture Lacking?" but really that solid black line that does like a whoop over the course of the year, that shows the growth rate of our cool season perennial crops. So this is, yes, how pasture grows, it's also how hay grows. And so you can see, because the horizontal line cutting the middle of that graph is animal demand, especially like a dairy farm like Reinhoud's. It's pretty consistent throughout the year. If we're growing out young stock, gradually as they grow, their demands will increase a bit, but like usually demand is fairly steady. So because the hay growth isn't steady, and because we've got to wait for harvest time, we've got some gaps that our perennials don't fill. And this is where cover crops, this is where annual forages really come into their own, because we have these species that grow really nicely in some of these gaps and can fill them. Yeah, okay. The reason I was grinning when Tyler was talking about brassicas was because I was thinking about this slide. So when we're trying to use cover crops as forage, when we're thinking about our annual crops, the vast majority of cover crops make great forage. So, ruminants are super adaptable in what they can eat. As long as we give them a transition period to get their gut used to what they're eating, they can eat a very diverse range of plants. There are a few things that maybe have toxic properties. Anything that's prickly is probably a no-go. Sometimes they just say that tastes yuck, even if it's not going to hurt them. We call that palatability. If it's palatable, it's delicious. If it's not palatable, they don't want to eat it. But yeah, so there's some of that. But what we find is that even within the realm of cover crops that are palatable, that are grazable, there's fewer crops that store nicely. So brassicas as a grazable crop, high protein, low fiber, can be palatable, but they don't store very nicely because they're so wet and they don't have a ton of sugar in that leaf matter. They have some, because obviously leaves produce sugar with photosynthesis, but they don't have a ton. So they really don't ensile very nicely. So my challenge to Tyler would be like, okay, if you want to put brassicas in to have that diverse root system and have all that wonderful soil health benefit, which is why Tyler as a cropper is, I'm assuming, growing a cover crop, to get those brassicas in, you might need to talk to your neighbor about grazing those acres, because they're not going to store as baleage very nicely if you get brassicas into that mix. This might be my most important slide. So I keep issuing a challenge every time I give a talk over this last year, to particularly to livestock producers, but also to any CCAs, any advisors, anyone working on the feed side of things. Basically, there are 3 experts that need to be in on the conversation when you're coming up with a forage plan, whether it's just for the annuals or if you're trying to mix annuals and perennials into some sort of rotation system. Those experts are the producer, the nutritionist, and the agronomist. And I do use nutritionist and agronomist a little bit loosely. Whoever helps the producer with their feed plan and whoever helps the producer with their crop plan count in this particular situation. But basically, the agronomist is an expert in how do we meet yield potential? How do we come up with a crop rotation that minimizes pest pressures? How do we find those spots to apply manure? How do we work with the soil type? How do we do all those things? Okay, that's what the agronomist is an expert in. The nutritionist is an expert in the ingredients that we've harvested from that field, right? Their main focus is usually quality. They understand what the animals need to really perform well. So they're the ones that know whether a crop swap is going to work or not going to work when it comes to actually feeding that product. And the producer is an expert too. Producers understand, you know, what past challenges have they had on their farm? What labor do they have available? What equipment do they have available? What are the goals on their farm? Hopefully they know that. That's kind of a big one. So getting all 3 of these experts together on the same phone call or when it's safe at the same kitchen table meeting to figure this out is so important, because it does prevent the producer from playing a bad game of broken telephone, talking to the nutritionist and talking to the agronomist and going back and forth. Because sometimes, you know, we've got 3 experts here, but they didn't train in the same thing. They don't necessarily understand why someone else is making the suggestions and recommendations that they are. So by getting everyone on the same conversation, you can do really wonderful things with that forage crop plan. So that's my challenge to you. The last thing that I want to share before we open this up for more questions, more discussion, is that agronomy for a cover crop is not the same as agronomy for using that same species as a forage crop. So I've got rye up here as an example on the screen, because we can grow cereal rye as a forage, we can grow cereal rye as a cover crop, and we can grow cereal rye as a grain. So I've took some key agronomic recommendations for each of these just to highlight how different they are. So as a grain crop, we are targeting about 800,000 seeds per acre, which is fantastic that they are that precise. Forages still have a ways to go on the agronomy side to get to that level of precision. So we're still unfortunately working in pounds per acre, which results in some very uneven populations by times. But our seeding rate on forages is kind of that 90 to 110 pounds per acre for cereal rye. As a cover crop, depends on what you're going for. 25 pounds could probably help with an erosion problem. 60 might do better for weed suppression, right? But you've got, it's still a much lower rate because you're not pushing yield. Yield is not the thing you're looking for in a cover crop. It is what you're looking for in a forage. Seeding dates. For a grain crop, for a forage crop, we're anticipating a lot of economic value out of that fall rye. So we ideally would love to plant it the same date as the optimum for winter wheat establishment for your area. And I know Joanna Fallings, our cereal specialist, has a great map of like what that date is for your part of the province. If you're using fall rye as a cover crop, you can kind of chuck it in whenever you get a chance, because it's so winter hardy that like, even if you stick it in November in a lot of parts of the province, it'll still catch, it'll still survive the winter, it'll still help keep your soil in place. Will it yield the best it could for feed? No, but you'd get a cover crop. So timing is there too. You know, nitrogen rates change a little bit. Harvest timing is obviously very important for forage quality. Boot stage, that would give you a dairy quality forage. So that's probably what Reinhoud is looking for. If you were trying to feed beef cows, you could probably go closer to heading. You don't want it to totally head out, but you could push a little bit there. But yeah, between flag leaf and heads emerged is kind of your window, and then earlier for greater forage quality, higher digestibility, later for less digestible but more yield. So that's rye as an example, but there's similar differences with most of the species that we use as both cover crops and annual forages. All right, so that's what I brought to stimulate some thought and discussion.
Thanks so much, Christine. We are going to head into our discussion time now. So I'm going to invite Tyler and Reinhoud back, and got a few questions here. I'd love to kick it off by asking this in light of what Christine was kind of sharing there. You know, don't think about cover crops or annual forages as emergency anymore, but that they could be a regular part of our feed program. If that's the case, what is the key to consistency? So Tyler and Reinhoud, what would you say the key agronomic insights are to getting consistent forage, both biomass and forage quality off of those cover crops, those forage crops? Tyler, why don't I go to you first?
Early planting.
Okay.
That's my 1 point comment for that question, or early planting.
Yep. Yep. And for your region, what does that look like for you? What are you dancing around there?
We would be anytime in August would be early planting. I have planted as late as December the 4th. We planted cereal rye last year on corn stubble on December the 4th in the snow, and it was there and it sprouted and it survived. It got sprayed off in the springtime because it just was not going to make anything other than a cover crop.
Right, right. Okay, and remind us of the rotation you're working with as you talk about early planting, late August. You're coming after wheat there?
That's coming after a wheat crop. Some of our acres are in vegetables, green harvest peas. So I have approximately 80 acres of pea ground that will be harvested and can be cover cropped early. Well,
okay, that's great. Okay, so early planting is the key to success. What about you, Reinhoud?
Yeah, that would be the same. Yeah, for us after quarter silage, it will be usually September. But as soon as the harvester has a part of the field empty, we'll try to get the planter in there going. Yeah, so but if we got some wheat some years, winter wheat, then we can do that. Yeah, also in August. Yeah, so but then it might be even an oats, and then we still can harvest that in October or something. That we had that in the past. Yeah, and it worked out really well.
Okay. Christine, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess just a thought that I haven't tried this out under Ontario conditions, but there's research out of New York State, which does have a similar climate to us, that suggests planting your winter cereals for forage 10 days to 2 weeks earlier than the optimum winter wheat planting date. And I've debated this back and forth with Joanna Fallings a little bit, because the issue with going earlier than the winter wheat date is that potentially you could increase the risk of barley yellow dwarf virus or snow molds or those kinds of things. And we haven't done any trials yet in Ontario to find out how big of a concern that is in a forage crop. But yeah, overall early planting, yes, is very important because tillers are yield, right? Our yield isn't how much grain fill you have. Our yield is how much leaf material do you have. So by getting it in early, it gives it a lot more time to tiller. It's you can never make up for all that fall tillering in the spring. So yeah, planting early is super important, but how early is too early is a question we don't have a definitive answer to yet.
Okay. And
I would,
yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
if interrupt, Cam, I would suggest that that planting date, Christine, has to do whether your forage crop is going to be harvested for feed in the fall still, or whether it is going to overwinter and be harvested in the springtime.
Can you paint that out a little bit more for us, Tyler? Like what's your thought process there?
We have a neighbor who will take oats and peas planted behind a wheat crop, so harvested late July into August and planted sometime in August, and that would be harvested for feed sometime early November as baleage. And last year we planted a cereal rye crop approximately the end of August, early September, and that was allowed to overwinter. And we took off, I think we got close to 7 4x4 round bales per acre of cereal rye this spring off of those acres. So it would be dependent on whether you need feed to overwinter or whether you need feed early in the spring and the crop that you're going to plant, whether it will overwinter or not.
And yeah, and when I'm talking about using those winter wheat dates, I'm talking about winter cereals as forage. So fall rye, winter triticale. Yeah, if you're going for a spring cereal in after a winter wheat crop, yeah, whack that in as early as you can, because you want to give it the growing season to get that off in the fall.
Great. And Christine, earlier you had kind of mentioned, you'd alluded to some disease issues. There's a question in here for you, Tyler, about rust. With the oats and the peas, has there ever been any concern from your neighbor about palatability? Is there ever a point where you'd consider applying fungicides to deal with rust?
It is not something that he and I have discussed, but I have followed some internet threads where they suggest a fungicide application increases their yield considerably. And I would strongly believe that it's at least worth a trial.
Yep. Okay. Reinhoud, I know you're working with cereal rye, but similar question. Are you concerned at all about any pest challenges? Does that change how you manage the rye?
No, so far not. It's never been with rye so simple to do, and there's the weed control is really just so clean. Even after you take it off, you plant your next crop in there, and there is nothing. So I've seen oats after wheat that in October had some rust. If you mow it, then you see the clouds of rust going around. That was for heifer feed at the time, so you're not so concerned about intakes. If you go for in a dairy ration for the milking cows, then definitely would hurt intakes. Yeah. So, but I never considered anything for that. No.
Okay, Christine, have you seen any of that with any of the other growers you work with?
So we know that a lot of oat varieties are susceptible to crown rust. So that's usually the culprit when we get rusty oats. Rust is not a type of fungus that produces mycotoxins, which can make animals sick and affect performance that way. But anytime you get a fungus, even one that doesn't cause toxicity problems in the animal, that fungus is eating the sugars and proteins out of the plant. So it is reducing the nutritional quality and it's reducing the palatability because it's dusty and it's kind of like, you don't really want to eat mold. So yeah, for oats, because we know that they're susceptible to crown rust, they're one to watch, they're one to scout for, because reasonably often a fungicide application will pay for itself, just protecting the yield and the quality of that crop. We don't tend to see those kinds of issues nearly as frequently in rye and in some of our other cereals. I even know some producers that will grow a barley oat mix or a barley oat pea mix, just because having the barley in there kind of cuts back on the rye or the rust propagation potential. But some of it too is managing those hosts that allow rust to get established. So buckthorn, and there's a couple other ones that I'm missing off the top of my head, but yeah, interrupting the life cycle of the rust helps, and then scouting it so that if it does need a fungicide, you're ready to go on oats. But yeah, the other ones aren't nearly under that same kind of pressure.
Okay, great. Another question came in here, and actually just before I do that, just a reminder for those of you who are looking to collect CEU credits, we will have a slide come up at the end. There will be a QR code that you can scan or send your contact info to Anne Verhollen's email, and you'll be able to get your CEU credits for this session. Another question here. For ensiling different forages, are there special considerations that need to be made to ensure proper fermentation? Is that related to crop species, like proper bacteria that might not be naturally available, or different harvest moisture? Does any one of you want to jump on that first, or I'm going to volunteer people?
I can comment on that, but we don't use at the moment any inoculants that we could use in the past. But right now, to get it off as soon as possible, and yeah, like we put it in bunks with sidewall plastic, packet. So a good packer on the bunk that does a good job, and right away, as soon as they're done, make sure it's nice and sealed with plastic and tires, and keep it closed for yeah, at least a month. The longer the better, I think, as it is good inside. And then as you feed out, and make sure you do a nice job, keep the surface neat, and yeah, and make sure there are no rodents in and around your feed storage. Yeah, that's the main concern. Yeah, so
great. Tyler, do you have any comment on that? I know you're not necessarily ensiling, but anything that your neighbor has been talking about how he manages?
I am not aware of anyone locally using any inoculants on their silage.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Christine?
Yeah, so the bacteria that ferment the crop. So for fermentation, we're being microbiologists when we're trying to make silage. So you need some sort of energy in that forage. So sugars, starches, you need the right amount of water. If it's too wet, that silo is going to seep and run, and that's an environmental hazard. If it's too dry, it's not going to pack properly. And like Reinhoud said, packing is so important because it gets rid of the air, because the bacteria that we're working with, they ferment the crop when there's no air in that silage. They're anaerobic bacteria. So from the independent research that's been done, using a silage inoculant is most likely to pay for itself when things didn't go quite perfect. Like maybe the crop's a little drier than you wanted it to be, or you have some other reason to doubt that maybe the natural bacteria populations aren't there. So it can be insurance in a way of just trying to make sure there's enough of those bacteria there. But yeah, so it's not always necessary, but it can be a helpful tool. Also, don't confuse silage inoculants with hay preservatives. They work in opposite ways. So those, you don't want to apply the wrong one. Hay preservatives are for dry hay. Silage inoculants are for silage.
Emphasizing the need once again to have the right people around the table to be having those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, keeping the air out, getting it packed properly, having it the right moisture content, all of those things are going to help that fermentation happen efficiently. So the microbes are going to convert most of those sugars and starches into lactic acid, which has basically the same amount of energy. And that's what's going to allow ruminants to do their thing to the best of their ability, because their feed is going to be awesome. And keeping the air out so that like rodent claws aren't puncturing holes in your plastic, and birds and wildlife and stuff. So yeah, that kind of management is all keeping the air out.
Perfect. But I know there's a question here from Katie. When doing late fall baleage, at what point do you use colored plastic instead of white to help fermentation?
yeah, it's been a long time that we did baleage, and it's just where the custom guy shows up with kind of plastic. But right now, over the last 12 years, we did it all in bunks, and it will be covered. You can roll it out either with the black side up or the white side up, but we choose the white side up. I don't know. There is a little bit of research, I think, that shows white keeps it cooler, but you cover it with all black tires. So sometimes I wonder, but anyway, we choose the white side up, and yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And a second one, not a follow-up, but more about agronomy. How much commercial nitrogen are you applying to corn at planting? And do you apply more than you would if there wasn't any rye proceeding?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I don't think we really count for the rye any on the nitrogen side. It might be a little bit. I don't know the numbers exactly. That I leave that up to my to Belmont Farm Supply, who is our support in that. Yeah, we spread some nitrogen in the spring on the rye, so there is still some, hopefully, for the corn, and then we put as liquid manure on, and this year then after planting a lot of liquid manure too, and then we can cut back on commercial fertilizer as much as possible. Yeah, so, but I don't know exactly the numbers what we put on out of my head.
Okay, no worries. And out of personal curiosity, I did a little bit of work in my my graduate studies on rye before corn and saw some issues. Have you had any experience, any negative experiences with the rye before corn? Noticed any yield drags because of that?
Yeah, I think there is. Depends a bit on the year, but you do see the corn a little bit yellow as it is at 2, 3, 4 leaf stage, and it has to do with the certain toxins in the root system, right? That there is a name for it, I don't know, and looks like soybeans they don't get bothered with that.
Yeah.
Corn is definitely so. Yeah, it doesn't look too great at that stage, but then this year too, then we get all the rains in June, and it is phenomenal how it grows now. Yeah, it is. But there might be some year later too. Usually this year was May 15 we planted, so that is still early, but we've been later too. So there is some yield drag there that you're later, but I think you already have lots of feed coming off. You got to count for that too. So I think it's an overall win every year.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, and that definitely ties back to a conversation we were having in the previous webinar on rye allelopathy and the effect of that on glyphosate-resistant weeds. So definitely an interesting conversation. Question here from Eleanor. If you wanted to burn down a hayfield, could you plant rye to harvest in the fall? And if so, when would you be planting in Eastern Ontario? So I guess Tyler, kind of looking at you there. Could you plant winter rye, harvest in the spring for feed, and then will it come back for I guess there's a lot of questions there. So maybe let's just take the first two and we'll see if we can get to Eleanor's latest question. So if you wanted to burn down a hayfield, could you plant rye to harvest in the fall? And what would you be doing, Tyler?
Yes, I would have no worries about burning off a hayfield and planting rye into that. I don't think that I would want to be planting much later than the end of September. And I would hope to have that crop harvested in the springtime by the 1st of June would be my thought in Prince Edward County.
If you wanted to get a fall harvest in, where would you be looking? Christine, I see you're kind of...
Yeah, if you want fall forage, I wouldn't be planting a fall cereal, right? So when you're looking at integrating these annuals, one of the big questions is, when do you need the feed? If you need the feed in the fall rye, winter triticale, like they go and they tiller and they kind of hang out. Like we like lots of tillers for a forage crop, but they just kind of hang out in the fall. So there's enough forage there, you could graze it in the fall and get something out of it. But if you're trying to bale that, you're going to have more yield with a spring cereal. So a burn down on a perennial hayfield is probably going to be more effective in the early fall because those crops are translocating nutrients to the roots. They're hardening off for winter. They're moving stuff down. So you can get a systemic herbicide down into the roots and actually kill that much more effectively. But if you want the annual forage for the fall, a fall cereal is probably not going to do it. You want to look at a spring cereal, and then you got to look at, okay, how late are you burning off that hay Do you
Right.
still have a growing window for your spring cereal to actually forage in the fall? Fall cereals are awesome for spring stored forage because they're ready earlier than first cut. Like that's one of the beauties of them, is like if you can get through the winter but you're not sure you can get the first cut, that's where fall rye and winter triticale really sing. And while in a ration they play basically the same role, which one you choose kind of depends on your crop rotation and how early your ground is ready, because triticale is like 10 days to 2 weeks later. So if you don't have super early ground, sometimes that's a better fit. But yeah, when you need the feed should really be the first question you answer before you start looking at what crop you're going for, because to plant a winter cereal in the fall, you might get some grazing off it, but it's not going to boost your forage inventory, your stored forage inventory in the fall. So if you need that feed for the winter, go spring cereal.
Okay. Lots of interesting considerations to make there. And I feel like there could be a bunch more questions, but we are just about getting to the time where we need to wrap up. There was another question there. I think if we can deal with this quickly, about can you get multiple cuts out of those annuals? So rye, fall planted rye, can you take a first cut and a second cut in the spring, or just because of its growth habit, after you take that first cut, boot stage, because it's already, I guess, since it's already started developing flowers, does that terminate it, and you're not essentially going to get a good second cut?
So forage varieties of cereals tend to have more aggressive regrowth. Yeah, can you get a second cut? Yeah, maybe. Is it going to be worth your while to wait? Because harvesting is the most expensive part of growing a forage crop, because your cost per acre to run that equipment does not change very much, but your cost per ton varies hugely between a high yielding crop and a low yielding crop. High yielding crop is cheap per ton. Low yielding crop is expensive per ton. So to keep it and not be sure of your regrowth yield potential, that's something you're gonna have to weigh. And I'd love to hear from Reinhoud and Tyler if they've got other thoughts on, like, would you keep it if you had a forage variety that was more likely to grow back?
No, I don't think rye will regrow. It's definitely not worth it. You got to plant. If you're still short of feed, just plant corn in there, and then you got in September you got the great yield of corn silage again. So I don't think that is worth it at all. No.
Nice, clear answer. And I see, Tyler, you put in the chat, you agree. I'm assuming that was about that recent conversation, and I saw you nodding your head there. So
Yes,
good.
I would agree with on that.
Perfect. Okay, it is 12:59, so it's time to wrap up. Give a big thank you to Christine and Reinhoud and Tyler. So grateful for you taking the time to share what you're doing and share your expertise in this conversation. If you are a CCA and you're looking to claim some credits, you can use that QR code. We're going to launch a final poll to close off our time here, just to make sure that we hit all the boxes that we were hoping to hit. Was this a valuable conversation for you? There we go. Those are the right polls. And so we would love to hear your feedback on this. This was recorded, and so it is going to be available and posted to the Ontario Field Crops YouTube channel. So if you're wanting to circle back and watch this conversation again, you can do that, and it'll be up on that YouTube channel shortly. Want to say a big thank you once again to Quality Seeds for their sponsorship of this webinar. We would not be able to put this on in the same capacity without you, and so thank you to Quality Seeds, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. We're glad that this was informative. That looks great, and look forward to seeing what you're all going to do with this new knowledge from today on. And feel free to stay in touch if you've continued to got questions for Christine, Reinhoud, and Tyler. I'm sure they'd be happy to engage with them. So thanks once again, and take care. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
You and take care, everyone.